Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host, and today we've got a very special guest, Julian Kulkarni. Now, Julian, you are a six-time B2B CMO, and I think you said that you probably consulted with over 15 other companies in that kind of a capacity. You've lived in 6 different countries. You've managed teams in over 40 different countries. You've got a world of background when it comes to B2B marketing, and we're going to use that today because what we're going to be talking about is how to address the number one challenge for B2B sellers today. And that hidden challenge is trust. And it's the foundation of relationships. And we all know in the world of B2B, when we market and we sell, it's a relationship-based business. And that's so, so important. So we're going to unpack that in big ways today. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to just give you a chance to maybe expand a little bit on your background before we get started.
No, thanks, Stephen. I must say you're doing a pretty good job of it yourself already, but so thanks for that. Exactly as you put it, I've been throughout my career mainly B2B SaaS, and in fact, my first company I worked for was actually called SaaS back in the day. I've worked in basically in global marketing, everything from large software companies where I've come in and had impact, but also I've founded a couple of companies myself in the B2B software as a service, even before it was a thing. Up to now, I've definitely enjoyed living in different countries. I think working with different teams, like whatever the problem thrown at me, if it's a new company, you've got to build it from the ground up. If it's an existing one, you've got to re-engineer. If it's a merger and acquisition, you've got to get the best of everything that you brought into the new company and make it work. On the personal side, when I'm not working as a CMO or an advisor, I spend a lot of time with I've got twin daughters who are now 22, take a lot of my time, like powerboating and a few other hobbies, trying to keep fit with various levels of success on that. I think it's always the balance between the threads of through the different work I do, but also learning from everything, and you learn from everyone. I learn from my kids, I learn from the companies I work for, and I learn, so I think that maybe gives you a bit of a taste of things.
Well, good. No matter how old we get, we're always still learning, right?
Yeah, that's it.
So here's what I'd love to do. Set the groundwork here a little bit on this hidden challenge that B2B companies have today in trust. And I wanted to throw out a few different stats from last year's Edelman LinkedIn Trust Barometer, which they do on a regular basis, right? Not only has trust been going downward for decades in the United States, all over Europe, all over the world, right? But we're in a significant decline right now. And I think they had over 32,000 respondents in this worldwide study. And one of the most amazing findings that they had is that 61% worried that business leaders were being intentionally misleading. And that hit really hard because our brands are trust marks, right? That's kind of what we learned early on. If we don't have trust in the relationship, we're supposed to be trusted advisors. That's what a gardener or a forester would say, right? So this idea of trust is really woven into how we go to market. But when you and I first started talking, you brought up a really good point. You said, I want to start talking, Steve, about building and maintaining internal trust first. And I wanted to ask you about why you felt that was the place to start, which there's no argument, and why you think that's the place to start and what we should be doing internally to build trust.
It's a great question, or a series of questions there. I think for me, I always think it's important to look internally first. In all the different businesses I've been in, you can be aligned, and that's a great word, and it's good to be that. If you need to trust each other in a business, and that doesn't just mean the C-suite, it means across the business, across all the people who work. It could be in finance, you're calling in for the bills. It could be customer support, getting the complaints from customers when something comes in. How you deal with it, how you feel, and how you respond to that. If you trust the rest of the team, you trust the rest of the company, and you know why you're there, the kind of the why, as people often say, then that's kind of how you start to build trust. It's not through, and I think to some of your points earlier, you can talk about it, but it's really making sure that people feel it and believe it, I think, is important in that as well.
It's the people that are going to deliver on a consistent basis the services in a way that you're going to find trust, you're going to believe in them or not. You talked also about internally the role of trust and alignment. And misalignment in the C-suite is one of the biggest challenges we have. Tell me a little bit more about what you think about trust and alignment and how they relate to each other.
Well, I think alignment is important. It's like having sort of technically everybody being aligned, focused on the same objectives, having the same values and so on to an extent. But I think trust is more really not just having each other's backs, but really believing in the direction you're going and believing why you're there, what you're doing. And that needs to flow down the organization as well. I think having that at the top is a big plus, because if you don't have that, it's going to make it very difficult across all the other areas. Functional leaders in the business, do their teams trust them? Their teams felt heard, listened to, aligned, yes, but then beyond that, do they trust their leaders? I suppose that's really the key thing. And that's something you have to build. It doesn't just come. You don't just press a button, do a PowerPoint presentation, and then trust is there. There's a lot more to it. I'd say one thing is a lot of it's about what do they want to hear? And I think one of the things I'd say is ask them, talk to them, have as many conversations as possible. I get the most information about what's not going right after work events, when you just talk to people from across the organization and in the kitchen or by the water cooler, that kind of thing, having a coffee.
A lot of things that you mentioned there, I would put in the bucket of company culture.
Yeah.
And company culture, I do a podcast in the HR talent acquisition industry. We had a gentleman on, he was a PhD and he's a chief people officer, and he did his thesis on proving that literally employee engagement, if you can get employees engaged and excited about working in the business, that translated directly over to customer engagement and then growth of the business. He not only connected those dots, but he proved them, right? You kept saying things like they have to feel like they have a voice and they have to trust in their leaders. And that's not something that just happens. If you don't direct it, there will be a company culture. But from what I'm getting from what you're saying is you have to really work on that company culture. Is that a good takeaway in order to build that internal trust?
You have to work on it all the time. And like anything, it will evolve over time. We evolve as people every day, so companies evolve as well. And so, having a set of values, which is a good data point, depending on how it's being created, is really good. But beyond that, it's what people think of you. What do they say to their friends when they go home? What do they say to and I'll talk a bit later about connections and long-term impact, but I think it's what do they say to their spouse, their partner? What do they say in the pub? That's when you get the barometer of what they really think. And if that's the same as what they say and think at work, then you've got alignment and you've got, assuming they say good things, a good level of trust.
There's lots of things that impact the ability of creating trust. And there's things that erode it too. Inside of any organization, it's like a living organism. And there's things that change all the time. Mergers and acquisitions, right, are a big part of that. Launches, introductions of new service lines, things that significantly impact and change how the company operates, what it delivers in the marketplace. How does that impact, like mergers and acquisitions and things like that? How does that impact trust?
Let's take the scenario. I think the mergers and acquisitions is a great example. And I've been in businesses, great businesses, where you've got 3, 4, 5, even 7 or 8 companies who've combined together. Each of those companies has been a separate culture, possibly with their own leader, with their own values, with their own excitement. And particularly some of those were startups, so they're all startups at some point. And they've grown with their own cultures, their own beliefs. They're on a mission to change the world, or change the world in their way. And suddenly you're combined or smashed together, if you like. And so you've got all these different companies, and you have to rebuild a little bit that trust. Part of that, and the art of that, is taking the best from each and learning from each other and creating something better than the sum of parts. If you don't do it carefully and you don't do it right, you could end up damaging that excitement, that trust, what they've been before, into what they're coming.
So the idea of internal trust you've established really well as a foundation, because it's a part of our delivery. It's a part of the experience that the employees have, therefore the experience that the customers have. And CX is king in our industry. I want to transition over to external trust. That tidbit that I threw out at the beginning was external trust, B2B buyers and how they trust us, to the point where this big shift in the buyer's journey, where they're waiting longer and longer to want to even talk to us. They're making more and more decisions without our voice in the mix, right? And the reason behind that is because of the lack of trust. They're looking for unbiased, they're looking for ways that they can make their decision that aren't being influenced by somebody that they're worried about exaggerating or telling something that isn't really the truth. So tell me about how you think about building external trust in a world of B2B and relationships.
I think relationships is a very important word in all of that. And I think we'll talk, I'm sure, about hype and AI and other things in a minute. But I think for me, often the ultimate aim in companies is to sell, but it's actually to build long-term relationships. And sometimes people are ready to buy now. Sometimes they might come back in a couple of years. And it's how you treat people. A couple of data points which might be interesting. One of them is become a trusted advisor. They may not want to buy anything from you right now, but often B2B companies and people who work in the companies have an immense amount of knowledge about what's going on in the market, what's happening, what people should be doing. And it's not just buy my software. The guy who's buying the software or the company they're working for, they've got problems, pain points. Some of them you can address, some of them you can't. But I think it's about becoming a trusted advisor, someone they'll call as a sounding board and genuinely call to get advice, get insight, and so on. If you build up that side of things, and yeah, marketing can help. Yeah, there's lots of other support that can be given to that. But I think it's the individuals looking people in the eye, and face-to-face is coming back, even though AI is supercharging it. Real face-to-face handshakes, meeting people, particularly, and things like that, and building those long-term relationships, which transcend their businesses, which they transcend individual business relationships as well. If you've got that trust, it lasts a lifetime. And I've seen it many times.
There was a woman that came onto the podcast, and she was head of the customer service organization of a large B2B enterprise company. And her customer service organization had attributed to them revenue, new annual revenue growth that was 5 times larger than the average salesperson, the average customer success person. And she did exactly what you were saying, that literally, like, people would call them up just to spitball, just to throw ideas by them, right? Because they had built up such trust. That's the kind of relationship that, as soon as you started talking, that's immediately what I started thinking about, right? Is that a good takeaway or articulation?
It actually reminds me of another example, which was a fun one. I worked in a recruitment business a few years ago. And as you probably know, most recruitment businesses get their revenue from employers. The product is the candidate. Candidates are often hot when you want them, and then you drop them. In one company I worked in, the candidate came. At that time, our company couldn't find them a job, but they called because they trusted the recruiter who was working with them. And they said, like, hey, I'm going for another job, not with you, but I trust you more. Will you give me some help? So they did. So basically, he coached the candidate, and the candidate ended up getting a job, became chief information officer for a fairly large company. And then guess what? 4 weeks after she joined the company, called up saying, hey, I've got a recruited team. No one asked for anything, but it was by having that trust, being the one they called, and knowing that they were genuine and build that relationship, ended up being lucrative and still based on trust. Candidates have dropped really quickly, but they're current leaders and also future leaders. So when you think about a relationship with somebody now, even if you can't help them at all, you should still help them in a different way. And that builds loyalty, it builds trust, and people call you.
Absolutely. What a fantastic story. Like, how many recruiters would actually help somebody where a different recruiter at a different company was actually going to get the revenue from that placement? That's amazing. You dropped in a comment a few minutes ago about AI, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on the role of AI in trust building.
Well, I think, first of all, AI is massive. It's changing everything. And actually, areas like marketing are some of the most impactful or opportunities to impact in terms of efficiency, insight, taking away a lot of routine tasks, getting to understand more about what's going on, the customer. So all that stuff can be done on steroids, which is super important and super exciting as a marketer myself. It's like a playground of different things that you can do to crank things up. It's a super enabler for things, but it doesn't replace human interaction. And a couple of people said to me now, when I've got AI, it's going to run my department. I got my team doing AI bots doing everything. And so I won't have anything to do. But I said, actually, what are you going to do with that time? Maybe you could spend time out with your customers, speaking to your team, speaking to other people. Go work in customer support for a couple of days. Go and work in one of your customers. I worked in a prop tech business, and our customers were estate agents. So I said, like, go out and speak, go and work in an office for a day, deliver the coffees, try and understand what it's like, understand the pain, understand beyond the questionnaires on what happens and the research you can do. Get real and build those things, and listen to everybody, listen to what's happening, listen to what's not happening. I think AI, it's supercharged. There's so much you can do, but people are still people. And there's also something that everyone has access to. So you have to use it better than anyone else. That's a given. And that's not easy, but it's possible. But then use the time for building trust, use the time for listening, is what I'd say.
So two things I love about what you said there is, so we all know AI is going to dramatically change how we function in business, right? That's not what we're talking about here, but we all have about 150% of what we want to get done on our to-do list for every single day.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And if AI can make us more proactive, and that's what your point there was. But what I thought was the most interesting is now that you can be more proactive, what do you do with that time? In a day and age of technology and more data coming our way, more ability to understand our buyers through that world of data, your recommendation, which I 100% agree with, was get out there and talk to people, interact, right? Here's my question. In a world where we have more data than ever to help us understand our customers and our buyers, that still doesn't replace what you just talked about, which is getting out and actually talking to customers. Why did you use that as the analogy? You could have said you can dig deeper into the analysis. You have more time to dig into that data, right? But you didn't. Why is that?
I think the thing is you have to do that anyway. Like if it's table stakes to be able to dig deeper into the data and get that right. But I think it's how do you differentiate yourself? There's a lot you can do with AI and it's not mystical. It's something which will improve that. But I think it's because we're still people with AI. I mean, AI came along in its latest incarnation. It's been around in forms for like 20, 30 years in some form, but it's come along on steroids now. But people still buy from people and still people buy from people they trust. And so for me, that's the key. And the more conversations you have, the more you learn. AI can be ears and eyes listening and finding out more. And you can feed what you learn into AI, multiply that to other places, but nothing replaces that totally. You can analyze the hell out of everything, and you can analyze thousands of phone conversations, and that's great. I'm not belittling that at all. I'm just saying, how do we make ourselves exceptional? How do we make ourselves like, I don't want to be number 4 in my B2B market. I want to be number 1, and I have to earn that.
Absolutely. It's interesting because I don't know if we want to call it, there's a big trend towards human in the loop in AI, right? And a lot of that is focused on human in the loop in terms of how you're managing and how you're using AI. And you can't just let it be 100% automated. There has to be human kind of in that loop and how and what it's doing. What I'm hearing a lot more, and what I think you're saying is human in the loop is we have to have conversations. We learn so much from having a conversation that provides the color commentary or the foundation for interpreting what we're seeing and what we're learning out of AI as well.
Correct. It works before, during, and after in that process. And it could happen at scale. It's not just I'm a salesperson, therefore I'll pick up the phone more. But like across a company, I've worked in a couple of companies where everybody calls our customers, and then we define what our customers were and then what we're really selling. And the more you talk to them, but we got everyone to talk to them, not just sales and marketing, but finance. They have to call up to collect money off people sometimes, but they can also call up. We had exhibitions. We had like our CFO standing at the door of a major exhibition. We had a few exhibitions and asking questions to visitors, and she loved it. It was such a refreshing experience from being CFOing, if you like, to do that. Then for months afterwards, she was quoting things she'd found out from those conversations and putting that into how she was working and her function was working, which was great. At the beginning, she didn't want to do it, but once we got her out there, loved it. It's kind of getting out of your comfort zone and getting everyone. Of course, we've got to do our day jobs, but as we said earlier, we've got a little bit more time if we use AI correctly.
The thinking these days, when I talk to CMOs, a lot of CMOs, they take on a new position. Immediately, they'll pick up the phone or get on Teams or something, and they'll talk to customers, right? They'll talk to 15, 20 different customers. So they've got to learn, and it's outside of a sales environment, right? And so there's deep, deep learning that's there. But then they stop because they start doing other things that take up all their time. There's always things that can take up our time. But what I'm hearing from you saying is, we need to keep doing that. It's something that we can't stop doing. It has to be something we continually do.
It's super important. Like exactly, you're right. Like you can make the 15 calls or the 15 coffee conversations and get some data points, but the market moves on as well. People change, pressures. We know in the world we live in today, it's a moving feast. to say the least. And so we need to have real-time understanding and feedback. If I'm looking at my to-do list, as you mentioned, 150%, possibly more in many cases, it's like making sure that this is a priority. It's there. In a couple of companies, on a Friday or a Wednesday, we had a couple of hours where, unless there was an emergency, your time was pick up the phone, go and see a customer, call, and do that. Everybody do it. And it's okay to do it. And you don't have to do anything else in that time because it's a priority, not a non-priority. You're right, it can fizzle out, but it can't really fizzle out if you want to be successful. And so listening and talking is really important. Then maybe the other point there is, as I said earlier, like talking to the coalface. If you're an enterprise seller in a large B2B company, you can be doing your big deals, but go and work in customer support for a couple of days, see what people are hearing real time, have empathy for the guys who are receiving the calls and the guys who are making the calls or chats or whatever it is. That gives you an understanding, and that can impact the roadmap and the product and so on. It influences everything if you get it right. We've gone from AI to a lot of talking, but they work hand in hand and they work really effectively. I think we shouldn't forget the human touch because that's where trust is built.
You just answered the question, right? You just tied, I was like, how do we tie back these conversations to building trust? And these kind of conversations build huge trust, especially if those conversations aren't focused on you, it's focused on them. And that's a distinction that I wanted to ask. Like when you're having these conversations, this isn't a sales conversation. This is a conversation to learn about them.
And the other point I'd make the other way around, I was thinking about a couple of examples, was you're talking about your brand and you're talking long-term. Back when I was a graduate years ago, obviously I was talking to different companies, trying to get my first job and all that. Talked to some companies, really good experience, didn't get the job. Talked to other companies, really good experience, did get the job. But some of the ones I did or didn't actually go for, I remember more. And it's a bit like this, remember a bad experience more than you remember a good experience. I remember the ones who didn't follow up, were horrendous interviews, horrendous experience. And even like 20, 30 years later, I remember who those companies are. When you're letting someone down in a situation, if you do it gracefully, you'll go back. And maybe another example is I've been a buyer of CRM software, loads of times actually. But I remember one particular case where there were two major vendors, probably two of the biggest ones around. You can probably guess them, but I won't elaborate. Basically, one of them got the deal and one of them didn't. The one who didn't, there were reasons beyond, I liked them. They were great people, and I trusted both companies in that case. But the ones who I let down in that case, they handled it really gracefully. And as it happened, they handled it well. They said they understood, they listened, and they followed up, and we kept in touch. And then a few years later, there's 5 or 6 companies I've recommended to them. So they've actually done very well out of it because I believe that they handled it gracefully. Had another experience where they didn't handle it gracefully, and needless to say, haven't recommended them anymore because I didn't want my employers or my clients to be with someone I didn't trust in that. So that's part of the experience. It's to be thinking about that touch point now, that person you're dealing with, that 21-year-old, 22-year-old graduate, who are they going to be in a few years' time?
Here's what's fascinating about what you just said. Lots of things are fascinating about it, but we tend to think about our buyers that we're trying to influence as professional buyers, but they're not. Just like you, when you were the purchaser of a CRM technology or the MarTech, something in your MarTech stack, right? You're a CMO. That's something you're doing on the side. It's like a project. It has an end to it, right? It's a small part, really, of your total responsibilities. And we don't think that way when we think about our buyers. We think about them like this is the most important thing in their world. And it's just not. What I took away is think about it like the last time you bought. What was important to you? And how did the different suppliers or the folks that you were looking at, how did they interact with you? How did you feel about that? What were the best of that? And then how do I replicate that for our buyers? That's a really good way to think about it.
I think the other way is, in companies, often people want to go to the most senior person, talk to them, but they may not actually be the person making the decision. They might be signing the check, they might be signing the contract, but I've seen other cases, and that's about trust and how you behave as a professional in a business. How do you build relationships with everyone? They might be the decision. And even if they're not, I've seen people be quite disrespectful to others. And I've also seen people be really respectful and that sort of thing. And I think it's at all stages when you go into the reception in a business, when you're talking to anybody, don't assume, just they're a human being. I think that piece of trust is super important. You're going to park who they are and just treat them as a human being. You go a long way. It normally pays off.
Julian, we've talked about so much here. Our human brains can retain about two or three things at a time. If there was one thing that you wanted the leaders that are watching this to take away, what would the one takeaway be that you'd want them to have?
I think it's like all the stuff we've talked about, AI and things like that are a given, and you've got to get it right and you've got to do that. But I think do not forget the importance of human interaction, human trust inside your business and out at all levels. We can all be transactional. We want to hit our number for the quarter, but it's not about that. It's the long term. And I think if you think it's a long-term investment, everything you do, everyone you talk to, everyone you engage with, I think if you get that right, you're setting yourselves up for success. If you ignore it, and I think maybe your point earlier, which I thought was great, is you're doing a bit at the beginning and then you say, oh, I've done that bit now. I've done my trust thing. I think for me, it's keeping that going, keeping building on it, and look yourself in the mirror and ask people what they honestly think of you and what they think of what you're doing, and take the feedback and act on it. And then you'll win.
Well, I love that. That's a good way to end, is on the win. Here's what I do know. People are going to they rarely have an opportunity to talk to somebody who's been a 6-time B2B CMO, done everything that you've done here. I know people are going to have questions. Is it appropriate that I give out a link to your LinkedIn profile that people can reach out to you?
More than happy. I love curiosity. I love conversations. I love contradictions as well. I'm happy to be challenged, but I'd love to hear from people. So I'm more than happy to be connected.
Fantastic. So, the mission of this podcast is to bring voices like yours, C-suite leaders from all over the world that have worked in all different industries in the B2B world. And if we can bring our insights, our perspectives, our experiences together and learn from each other, then that's the rising tide that lifts all boats. And I just wanted to say thank you, because I think you were a really important part of that rising tide today. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Steve. It's been really fun and really great. And similar to what you just said, I have my own experience, but a lot of it's come from learning from many others. And that's helped me kind of keep agile and keep learning and keep building trust. So thank you.